The mood of federal ministers now negotiating in London will not be as aggressive as that of their army, but they will be as tough and determined. Their diplomatic assault on London was planned in this building here, the administrative headquarters of the Federation in Al-Ittihad. Throughout the talks, the main battle of words will be over the defense of South Arabia after 1968. South Arabia's case, as put to me by several of the ministers before they left for London, is that if Britain fails to provide a new defense treaty for after independence, in addition to providing a lot of money for South Arabia to build up her own defenses, Britain will be making it too easy for Egypt's President Nasser to take control of the area.
Aden alone will lose about £16 million a year from Britain's withdrawal. That's what the base ploughs into the colony's economy in rents, wages and over-the-counter trading. It's believed that federal ministers have been given an indication that Britain is prepared to continue aid at the present rate of £12 million a year for 2 years after independence. So unless the delegation in London can win promises of increased aid from Britain, South Arabia may find herself setting out from independence with a net loss of £4 million on its present income. The most urgent need before any sort of development can take place is for a vast improvement to South Arabia's communications. This beach road is the only land link between Aden and the coastal states of the Federation, and even to some of the states of the interior. At high tide, it's sometimes impassable, and travellers who haven't bothered to study the tide of the Indian Ocean have sometimes come to grief. When Britain's intended withdrawal from Aden was first announced, the Aden Chronicle proclaimed bitterly that Britain's achievement was 70 miles of tarmac in 70 years. The cotton belt of the Abian Delta. It's the most prosperous area of the whole of the South Arabian Federation outside Aden. 15 years ago, this plain was arid desert land and the scene of bloody tribal feuds. But prosperity in terms of hard cash, just over £1 million a year, part of which is passed on to farmers in the form of a dividend, is hard to detect in the sleepy streets of Jar, the capital of the Lower Jaffa. The cotton crop from the 50,000 acres now under cultivation is top quality. It's considered to be as good as the Sudan's and better than Egypt's. Cotton venture was started in 1948 with a loan from Britain. The last instalment of the loan repayment is to be paid this week. Most of the 300 workers employed in the factory are from the Yemen. Local people are too busy in the fields preparing and picking the crop. The size of the crop depends on the floods. There is no rainfall. With funds to provide modern methods of irrigation and guarantee water supplies, the expansion of the cotton industry could play a key role in South Arabia's development. Beyond the Abian Delta, the mountains of the Upper Jaffa state, not yet in the Federation, and the undemarcated border with the Yemen. According to British officials, few white men have ever dared set foot in the Upper Jaffa. Tribe plots against tribe, and clan makes war against clan. The only thing the tribesmen hate more than foreigners, it's said, is each other. The terrain and the tribesmen on either side of the mountains are less fierce, but here life goes on at a pace and fashion more like the 17th century than the 20th. The streets of Mukeras, the capital village of Audali state, don't echo with shouts of one man, one vote. That's what the menfolk in these states will be getting in 18 months' time. The question of whether or not to give women the vote has still to be decided. But in towns and villages where the windows of houses are made deliberately small to prevent their womenfolk inside being seen, this would be a huge step to take. The status symbol for all tribesmen is a gun, and the standard currency is not cash but ammunition. Ordinary families in the interior have rifles, the better ones have Bren guns, and the top people have bazookas. partly because of the import of rifles into Aden by the Crown agents, ostensibly for self-defense along the Yemen frontier, intertribal warfare is still deadly. The curse of the blood feud hangs over every village. There is even a specific price list for death. A tribesman who commits cold-blooded murder has the choice of being killed himself or raising £2,000 to pay as compensation to his victim's relatives. Because farming in the interior is mostly of a subsistence nature, farmers only toil when they have to. In most of the states of the Federation, the system of farming is still essentially feudal. The ruling families own most of the farming land. The villagers have to pay for their plots either in cash or with part of their produce. The feudal system is the chief target of attack by Arab socialists. They point to it as proof of their accusations that ruling families are exploiting the masses. British officials in South Arabia counter with the argument that the system works and that the traditional rulers enjoy the support of the majority of the people. But even the most optimistic officials won't estimate the chances of this traditional way of life surviving a possible overdose of Cairo-inspired revolutionary medicine. A more immediate threat to farmers is an appalling shortage of water. When they draw water from the wells, they have to hump it on their backs, sometimes by mule if they're lucky, to their fields, a distance for some of them of several miles. When we were in Mukeras, we saw the dynamiting of the last section of a new well. The event was celebrated with a dance in the village square, and the dancers were favoured by the attendance of the Wakil Naib, Ahmed bin Muhammad, a sort of municipal mayor who stands in when the ruler is away. The Wakil Naib arrived looking as though he was going to a fancy dress party, disguised perhaps as a portable armoury. So far, the revolutionary forces of Arab nationalism and Arab socialism have made little or no impression on the traditional way of life in the states of the Federation outside Aden. But in the marketplace of this village near Dala, a warning perhaps that two totally opposite philosophies may be about to clash head-on. On a consignment of tins of solid brilliantine, the presence of Gamal Abdel Nasser, President of the United Arab Republic. One man who has no doubts about President Nasser's intentions in South Arabia is Sir Richard Turnbull, the British High Commissioner in Aden.
Well, I'm not one of the pundits of the Foreign Office, and so maybe I don't have the full picture. But Nasser is certainly a great menace to South Arabia. And there's not the slightest doubt that if we went away, he would like to dominate the place. Whether he would produce a physical Egyptian presence, I don't know. But I don't think the reason we're leaving Aden is because we think that Egypt has ceased to be a very important factor in the Middle East.
You think it unwise to play down Nasser's ambitions in this area?
Well, I think one has to face the facts as they are. You only have to listen to the broadcasts from Cairo and from Taiz and from Sana'a to recognize what their ambitions are. They say openly that it is their desire to drive these horrible imperialists into the sea and to remove, not only to remove all vestiges of colonialism and so on from the country, but to make it extremely difficult for us to continue to operate here and to leave the place in a stable, economically viable condition.
If I could ask you finally, Sir Richard, what do you think, in your own mind, his ambitions are for Saudi Arabia?
I shall end up in the Tower of London if I pursue this course too far.
The number of British troops engaged in full-time anti-subversion duties in Aden has increased steadily since December 1963, when the Deputy British High Commissioner, Mr. George Henderson, was killed by a terrorist bomb at Aden Airport. Upwards of 6,000 British troops are now engaged exclusively on internal security duties. The nationalist scene in Aden itself is confused. Groupings and initials have become so numerous that nobody, it seems, is really sure who's fighting and for what. But undoubtedly the parent body of all the Cairo-backed nationalist groups is FLOSSY, the Front for the Liberation of Occupied South Yemen, in other words, Aden. FLOSSY's platform has been demands for the removal of the British base and free elections. The British government has already agreed to remove the base, and at a press conference last week, the chairman of the Federal Supreme Council announced his government's decision to accept the UN resolutions on South Arabia, which include the holding of free elections. I talked about this with Sheikh Mohammed Farid, Federal Minister for External Affairs and leader of the delegation in London.
If a provisional government is set up, a government which does not include some of the more extremist nationalist groupings, presumably the result will be a stepping up of terrorism and subversion.
I sincerely hope this will never happen. And I think that when they see that we are serious about implementing the United Nations resolutions, and when they see that all the states in Saudi Arabia, those inside the Federation and those outside the Federation, are sitting around and trying to implement the United Nations resolutions, I hope they will come and join. I think that any group that refuses to accept the United Nations resolution, that refuses to go to the people for election on the basis of adult universal suffrage, as required by the United Nations resolution, have not got the interest of the country at heart.
Well, then whose interest do you think they do have at heart?
Well, we will have to see. If I'm still hopeful that they will come. But if they don't come, if they don't accept what we have accepted, and if they don't join hands, then it will be clear that they represent foreign interest, not the interest of Saudi Arabia.
If all the assumptions about Nasser's future tactics are right, the federal forces will be all that stands between Nasser and the achievement of his alleged aim of destroying the Federation, unless it can be of his own choosing, and toppling the traditional rulers. At a Federal Army camp near Dala, I talked about the Army's ability to defend South Arabia after independence with its British commander, Brigadier Gordon Viner.
Brigadier Viner, when British troops withdraw from South Arabia in 1968, the Federal Army is the only organisation left to keep peace, to maintain political stability, and to keep Nasser-inspired subversion at bay if it comes. How well equipped to deal with this job is the Federal Army?
Well, of course, it's not equipped to deal with that job at all. The fighting strength of the Federal Regular Army at the moment is 5 infantry battalions with quite a lot of obsolete weapons and an armoured car squadron. You could see from that it's not balanced, nor is it strong enough to cope with a situation at the time of independence, a situation similar to the one we have at present.
Do you expect that when the day of independence comes, the situation will be the same as it is now?
Exactly, and probably worse. Not open aggression in the accepted term, but a stepping up of subversion and terrorism using the same methods as we know at the moment.
So in effect, what you're saying then is that if Nasser chooses to stir up the subversion campaign, that the Federal Army can't stop him?
As it's organised at the moment, definitely not.
Some of the Federal Army's equipment is distinctly vintage. like these Vickers machine guns introduced into the British Army in 1916. I asked Brigadier Weiner, who was putting the Federal Army's case at the London conference, about South Arabia's future defence requirements.
We require more infantry, we require our own artillery, more armoured cars, engineers, we require limited air support and a small navy. A small country like this in Arabia, and indeed any country in the world, cannot stand alone and must make a defence agreement with a friendly power.
But the British government has said quite clearly already that it does not intend to make any new defence treaties with South Arabia. Do you think at this late hour that that decision could or is likely to be changed?
Well, I sincerely hope so. However, if it is not, then the federal government must now, at this moment and very quickly, make such an agreement with a friendly power. And that agreement must be binding and guaranteed.
When you say friendly power, if it's not Britain, you presumably mean Saudi Arabia.
I think you must draw your own conclusions on that.
How far King Faisal is prepared to help South Arabia is not known, but it's thought likely that he will provide money for new weapons. The Arab officers of the Federal Army are keenly aware of the huge cost of building up their country's defences, but they say, we need the money, so we'll get it.
Well, if the British government refused to give anything to the South Arabian government, then I think we are going to be pushed, I can say by force, to ask for help and assist from other countries. Maybe from the, what I can say, from Arab countries, or maybe from the...
From Saudi Arabia, presumably, it's your biggest ally.
From the communist countries, I can say.
Do you think that might be a step?
It might, it may happen, in fact, because we are not quite sure that we are going to find or to get help from any Arab country, just straight away after independence. So this is not happened, in fact, then we shall ask it from the communist country. Because we can't stay a long time without anything, just to wait for another country
to give you
to
aid.
attack us, and then...
If Britain doesn't provide you with the necessary aid and equipment.
We can ask for help from any other country, whatever it is.
Because the Federal Regular Army is the strongest organised force in South Arabia, it has already become, Brigadier Weiner told me, a target for penetration. A great deal of effort, he said, is already being put into trying to turn the loyalty of the men. So what sort of men are they? Where does their loyalty lie? Above all, they are mercenaries. The majority of men get their first good meal when they join up. And with the exception of Kuwait, the Federal Army is the best paid in the Arab world. One danger may lie in the very progressiveness of the Federal Army. The men, particularly the officers, are very conscious of their newfound prestige. They are the new elite of South Arabia. Is it possible, then, that they will themselves one day want to rule the new Republic of South Arabia? Brigadier Weiner's answer was this: unless a strong, united central government comes with independence, there will be nothing for the Federal Army to owe allegiance to. In those circumstances, it is very possible that the army would take over the running of the country. And, said their commander, they do it damned efficiently.
عد اليمين عد اليسار